only reshape our own life, but reshape all of society as God's good design is directing us towards. What we're seeing with all of these commandments is that there's at least three dimensions to them. We think of them one-dimensionally so often. Very simple, very short, brief, concise commands, do this or don't do this, and we leave it at that. But the more we chew on them, like a Jolly Rancher or something, and turn it over and over, we see all the richness which is in there. It's not just a duty that we're called to. We see that there's actually a purpose as well, a purpose that this is driving us towards, and we would accomplish, even as a society, be accomplishing this grand purpose. So as we're fulfilling our duty in these commandments, we should understand what is this purpose that we're supposed to be aiming at in our duty. But third dimension is character and virtue. We ought to change and become different kinds of people. And the kind of virtue and character qualities that we're called to as Christians, like the fruit of the Spirit, for example, would make it so much easier to even fulfill these commands, wouldn't it? I mean, imagine how much easier it would be to eat healthy if you loved vegetables, like those vegetarian people. Like, it's so much easier for them. They just like it. What if we just liked doing what was good? Well, the character and qualities that are shaped in our life as we walk according to God's ways changes us into new kinds of people altogether. So we want to see all the different angles of each commandment and how they might totally not just reshape our life, as I said, but also reshape a society when individuals within a society are walking in God's ways. So to the fifth commandment, honor your mother and father. This is the only commandment that has a promise to it. Because when you honor your mother and father, he says you'll live long in the land. It had a particular context in the Old Covenant with the Israelites, but we'll see how the Apostle Paul repeats that in the New Testament. There's still something there for us. But first, what does it mean to honor somebody? What does it mean to honor someone? Other parts of the Bible will tell children explicitly, obey your parents. Other parts of the Bible will say to listen to your parents. Other parts of the Bible will even tell adult children to care for your parents. But in this single phrase we find everything encapsulated within it, to honor. Now in Hebrew, the way you pronounce things will serve a different emphasis. Like if I were to say, hey, listen to me, versus being more stern and saying, listen, like I might tell someone who is being disobedient. The way the way certain words are pronounced in Hebrews brings a different inflection, and here the way it's pronounced in this commandment is meant to make a cause or to bring about a result. So, for example, in Hebrew you could say or that pot is broken, or it could be break the pots, and sometimes they would just translate that, smash it. They would intensify the command. We have this intense version of this word honor here. It's used to describe Abraham in Genesis chapter 13, that he was very rich, or he was very honored, same word, in livestock, silver, and gold. He had a certain weight and glory about him as a man of renown. So then, what it means for us to honor our parents in this way is to actually bring this onto them. Bring them the glory, richly lavish on them the honor that they are due. This is an active call. There's nothing passive about this that we can get away with. Here's my own definition of what this might mean to honor our parents. Simple way to remember, to redeem and display their dignity. Redeem and display their dignity as parents. Kind of like this old lectern here. This is pretty old. I don't know what date it was built, but it actually goes back 6 generations of pastors in our church. And I wasn't even using it. I only brought it out maybe a month or two ago when Chuck showed it to me. He's like, I've had this in my garage. And I was curious if you'd be interested in it. And it was dusty, chipped paint, not a big deal. But when I found out this goes back 6 generations of pastors, I wonder how many sermons have been preached from this thing. This is pretty cool. So we honor it by bringing it out, dusting it off, repainting it. We wanted to redeem and display something's glory. That's an illustration of how to honor something. Now, our parents have this kind of dignity and worth and value because of who they are. It's so easy, first of all, to neglect it, to forget about it, to put it in the shed, to let their glory grow dust all over it, and to leave it forgotten. In this command, the Lord reminds us, get into the shed, bring it out, redeem the glory that your parents have. Redeem the glory that they are due because of raising you, and display it. Display it for other people to see. They have this inherent dignity for raising us, and we are called to honor them because of it. Now, how can we do this? What are some actual ways we can honor our parents? Well, there's different life stages that we will go through, and so there'll be different ways that we can honor them as we grow up. But all of you here, if you didn't know, are children. Every human being on the planet is a child. Therefore, this command extends to all people, and it extends throughout our whole life. You know, when Moses was giving these commandments, when he gets to the fifth commandment, he doesn't stop and say, now kids, listen up here. No, he just kept right on going, because this is for every single human being, and it's for all of society. So first, to young children. How might young children honor their parents? One word I've given for young children is obey. Simple as that, obey. We had a phrase in boot camp, in Marine Corps boot camp, and one of my buddies from boot camp is actually here right now. So what is the phrase, if you can get this? Instant and willingness, obedience to orders. That was the phrase we were told all the time at boot camp. You are to learn instant and willingness, obedience to orders. Now, why would they drill this phrase into Marine Corps recruits? Because in combat, you don't have time to think about whether or not you would like to obey a command. Or what is the philosophical underpinnings of this instruction here? You might die in the time between thinking that and then choosing whether or not to obey. This is appropriate for young children to learn obedience on this level. Not to be asking why just yet. We'll get there, but not just yet. Can we raise our children to learn how to trust our word with their very life? And I think this is one way they live long, because they don't die of their own stupidity, because we've taught them how not to die. That's the first couple of years, is teaching your children how not to die and how to just listen to your word and trust, oh, they have my best interest, because I didn't listen to them last time and my hand got burned or I fell down. Honor your mother and father, children. Obey them, that you might live long. Now, parents, we can overdo this, though. We can require this kind of obedience to things that aren't life and death situations. In fact, in a brand new book that's coming out from one of my favorite authors, Jonathan Haidt, he writes about, he calls the anxious generation. He's writing how kids today are more anxious and depressed than we've ever been able to record in history. Why? He gives two reasons why. Because we've underprotected them when it comes to internet and social media use, and we've overprotected them outside of screens. We've overprotected them on the playground. We've overprotected them in our neighborhoods. We've overdone this instant willingness and obedience to orders. So he gives an antidote. He says, when it comes to just life outside and playing with your friends, going to the grocery store, hanging out, let them take calculated risks, he says. Let them take risks and calculate the risks so that they can learn in varying degrees what they need to know about social relationships, behavior, and safety. So, for example, I was raking our yard a couple weeks ago, and I was supposed to be watching the children. So Henry is fine. He can get up and down the ladder and the slide on his own. But Callie, our 1-year-old, man, Henry never did that kind of stuff when she was her age. I didn't even think she was capable of it, so I wasn't as concerned to keep a close eye on her. But I look up, and she's halfway up the ladder. And I'm thinking, I know that last rung is a little bit longer than the other ones. She might misjudge that and fall down. And I thought, oh, she has gotten halfway up on her own without falling. And rather than rushing, I held myself back. I remembered Jonathan Haidt and his words of wisdom, and I said, let's just see how this plays out. She won't die. She got to the top all by herself, and we cheered for her. And I would have robbed her of that. by being a little too overprotective. We can overdo this, but children, young children, obey your parents. Understand the goodness of this simple instruction. This is for your good, and there's an appropriateness to us requiring obedience from our children. Now, what about older children? Older children, what are they asking? Why? This is a signal that they're ready to learn why. Older children, listen. This is your word, listen. This last week, we had all the bus drivers in the town of Sandwich in this room doing annual training. And I turn on the sound for them and everything, and I'm sitting in the back, and the trainer asked the quiz question. If your school bus gets stuck on railroad tracks, like stalls out or something, and it's stuck on tracks, how do you evacuate? There's 3 different options of where you can evacuate your students. There's one way that's right. And we all knew the right answer. We just said it. Back and forward, 45 degrees, and the angle of the train, towards the direction of the train. And we all thought that was sufficient. We were, clapping, putting our, patting our backs, thinking that that was good enough. And she says, does anyone know why we do it that way? Now, that's a different level. Do you understand why you would do something a certain way? That's a completely different level of understanding and wisdom. We need to get to that level. And we need to bring our children up to that level and not hold them back in the child stage of just obey. When they start to ask why, we should pull that string as much as we can. Now, I was limited to 3 whys per car ride as a kid, so I'm assuming it's going to get exhausting for me at some point in my parenthood. But we need to understand this is an appropriate phase. When the book of Proverbs talks to children so much, it only uses obey once. Over 20 times it uses the word listen. Listen. Consider what your parents are saying. Consider the cause and effect. A results in B, and ask why. We should be encouraging that as parents. But children, you can honor your parents by listening to them, being curious about the wisdom that they might have for you in life. That your life may be long. At this point, we're enjoying a long life because we've listened to the wisdom of our parents. Honor comes to parents. Does this not honor you, parents, when you see your children listen to something you've said, apply it to their life, and enjoy success because they took you for your word and trusted you? Parents, we can get it wrong here as well. I've already alluded to one point by growing weary and answering why. That might be one way we go wrong. A second way we might get it wrong, and especially when our children kind of graduate out of the listen stage. They're now adult children, but we're treating them as young children who still need to listen to our wisdom and guidance. Not every piece of advice is equal. Some you can be extremely sure about, and the consequences are severe. Others, less so severe. And we learn as parents, they're their own person, and they need to make their own decisions for life. I don't need to treat everything that they're doing equally. Who they marry, I might be a little more concerned about. Where they go to college, maybe less so. What kind of job to take, I'll have some input. But we need to rank how we're giving advice to our children and not treat it all equally, lest they grow weary of our advice and cut us off altogether, or grow bitter, or we grow bitter at them for choosing a different path of life than we would have chosen. Now, third, adult children, which is the majority of you in this room. How might adult children honor their parents? Provide or care. That could be your word. Provide or care. The Pharisees were really hit hard by this from Jesus. Jesus called out the Pharisees. He said to them in Mark chapter 7, "You have a fine way of invalidating God's commands in order to set up your own tradition." He gives the example. "You've heard it said, honor your father and mother, and whoever speaks evil of father or mother must be put to death. But you say, if anyone tells his father or mother, whatever benefit you might have received from me, I've decided to give this as an offering to God. You no longer let him do anything for his father or mother. You nullify the word of God by your tradition that you've handed down." What they're doing in this context is rather than giving a gift to their parents, supplying their needs of some kind, they created a loophole for themselves by registering it as a donation to the church. Jesus says, in doing this, you are breaking the fifth commandment. So read between the lines. How is one way we might break the fifth commandment? By not providing for and caring for our parents as they get older. Now, not all of your parents will have financial or like housing needs, but they still have social needs. They still can get lonely. There's so many ways we can honor our elderly parents. Don't cut yourself off from fulfilling this just because they're maybe more well off than you are. How would the promise, though, that you may live long in the land apply to this situation? If you were an adult and you were caring for and providing for your own parents, how might that play into you living long? Because if you have children, they're watching how you're caring for your parents. And one day, if the Lord allows you to live long, you will be that elderly parent. And if your children treated you the way they saw you treat your parents, how would it go? How much would you enjoy your life? How long do you think you would live in that condition? This is how we live long, by caring for our parents, creating a culture and setting an example for how to provide for their needs. Our parents are worthy of honor, and we ought to redeem their honor and display it by lifting up their dignity. It's perhaps nowhere better depicted in Scripture as an illustration than 1 Kings chapter 2. 1 Kings chapter 2, King David leaves the throne, and his son Solomon comes into the throne. The people are singing, "Long live King Solomon." He's brought into his palace in a big parade. He's robed in splendor as a king. He sits down on his throne, and you know what happens next? His mother enters the room, and what does he do? He bows. He bows down to his mother. Can you imagine that? A king in all of his splendor at the moment of his coronation, stepping down to bow. What a beautiful picture of what it looks like to honor our mother and father. Now, what's the purpose of this command? Where is this driving us toward? What target can we look at and aim for as we discover ways to honor our parents? Well, this, as I've alluded to, would shape all of society and not just our own life. Because if we had healthier families, we would have healthier societies. If we had households of children who honored their parents, we would create a culture of citizenship which honored governing authorities and cared for the elderly in a community. Because the first society that a child ever enters and interacts with is their own family. The household functions like a little town where children become a participating member, learning wise ways to relate to authority, learning ways to negotiate with peers, learning ways to compromise personal wants in order to pursue a common goal. The house is like a little town. Teaching young children to honor their parents is the first building block for shaping future members of society who understand the goodness of cooperating with other people and negotiating agreements and honoring authority. The values you learn in the home are the values you take into the culture. When the Lord gave the fifth commandment, he had an entire society in mind. The personal relationships we think of when we hear all the 10 commandments flower into our societal relationships as well. So let's look at just 2 social benefits we see in the New Testament for obeying our parents and honoring them. A purpose this is driving us toward that flowers into. First, the New Testament authors echo the fifth commandment, the language of the fifth commandment, by calling us to honor our governing authorities. Here's a general command from Romans chapter 13. It says, pay your obligations to everyone. In other words, to whoever you're obligated to. Taxes to those who you owe taxes to. Tolls to those who you owe tolls to. Respect to those who you owe respect, and honor to those who you owe honor. So this command is now flowering out and extending beyond just our relationship with our parents, but to all kinds of relationships, all kinds of authority relationships we experience. Children who are taught this truth, goodness, and beauty of the fifth commandment become adults who are more inclined to do so regarding governing authorities wherever they go, whether it's school or at work or in the political society. And we see this very specific example, if you didn't believe me, from Romans 13. In 1 Peter chapter 2, the Apostle Peter says, "Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that they will observe your good works and give glory to God." General. But what good works does he have in mind? He goes on, "Submit to every human authority because of the Lord, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are as those sent out by him. Honor the emperor." We can only imagine the context he's dealing with is much more volatile than it was than what we're dealing with today. First century in the Roman world was not nice to Christians. And yet see how the apostles are even still applying God's good design for life. As a church, our reputation in town to other people in Sandwich and the other towns beyond should not be one of bashing our governing authorities. They should not recognize this church as a church that bashes their governing authorities, despite whatever personal disagreements we might have from time to time and election season to election season. It should be clear, in fact, in contrast to the watching world, that we honor our governing authorities despite where we align with them on. It should be very clear that this church honors its governing authorities. We do not live like the world. We are not like pagan nations, as Peter's writing to the church, who make their own subjective determination of who they're willing to honor and when, who gives and takes back honor at their own discretion. We give honor to those whom honor is due. Back to Romans chapter 13. So then, the one who resists authority is opposing God's command. And those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. A second way society benefits from households who honor their parents is by caring for the elderly among us who do not have a surviving family to care for them. If we are commanded to honor our mother and father, what happens to parents who don't have children or who don't have any surviving children? Do we get a cop-out? Are they without honor? Are they without anyone to dignify them? The Apostle Paul writes, absolutely not. Romans chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Within the church community, don't rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father. Younger men as brothers. Older women as mothers. The younger women as sisters with all purity. He's saying you should treat older men and women in the church as if they were your mother and father, the same way you would honor your mother and father. He goes on in verse 3, therefore, even more specific application, support widows who are in genuine need. And he explains what genuine need means there. There are some widows who have a family around them that are able to care for them, but there are some widows who don't. We must care for them. And this comes out of the ethic of the fifth commandment. They have a God-given right to be cared for. And it would be unjust for us to deny them the honor they are due. So first, we need to consider who they might be. Do you know who the widows and widowers are in our church? Do you know who the widows and widowers are in your own neighborhood, on your street? You should actively find out and pursue them, to take the old lectern and dust it off, to display the dignity that nobody else is displaying for them. And so you will honor God as you let the fifth commandment just drive you to so many beautiful purposes to display to a watching world. If the Lord spares your life and you're able to see a long life, here's how this will cause you to live long in the land, because you'll be one elderly person in church one day too. You'll be an elderly person in town on your street. Maybe one day you'll be the oldest person on your street. That'll be cool. But if the people in your church and the people on your street treated you the way you're currently treating the elderly in your community, how much do you think you would enjoy your life? How long do you think you would go on living like that? It's really this simple. Treat others the way you would want to be treated. This is why Jesus says you can sum up all these commandments with love your neighbor as yourself. Treat the elderly in your community the way you would want your community to treat you in your old age. And now we can see yet another way the promise of the fifth commandment can be fulfilled in our life. We can live long in the land, long in our church, long on our street, when we have been participated in creating a culture that honored the elderly among them. A society that does not value and care for the elderly will bear the burden they created in their old age. But if they create a culture of caring for the elderly in society, they would eventually be the recipients of the culture they helped create, and in a way pay themselves the dividends in advance which they invested. Now, how can we do this? How can we be reshaped into people who actually pursue this duty that we've now meditated on and seen in different ways? In other words, what does this have to do with Jesus? Does Jesus have anything to say about this? Does Jesus have anything to do with this fifth commandment? We've heard a lot of law. Now what about the gospel? Well, when we examine Jesus' life, we see some kind of funny things here. Luke chapter 2, I think, might be the only account of his childhood that we have. And in that single account of his childhood, he actually really frustrated Mary and Joseph. They went on a yearly trip to celebrate a festival in Jerusalem. So this whole caravan of people are traveling down, aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody. Jesus goes to the temple, and he's found there talking with the rabbis. But that's only after all of his family left. Nobody got Jesus. We forgot about him. This young boy, who left? I mean, this happens every day. This happened yesterday. Where's Callie? And Catherine's asking me, and I'm asking her. So they run back to Jerusalem, and they're searching this big city, high and low. They find him in the temple, just casually talking with some rabbis. Can you imagine how frustrating that must have been? Where were you? But Jesus says something very strange that Mary would ponder the rest of her life. He says, I must be about my Father's business. What a weird thing to say. She had no response and expect something like that, but also knowing that an angel appeared to me and told me he was the Messiah. Maybe there's some connection there. What could this mean? Well, she would find out what that meant. Because as he would grow older, he becomes an adult, and they're now attending a family wedding in Cana. This account comes from John chapter 2. The wine runs out at the wedding, which is a big deal. It's a big emergency. This is very embarrassing for the host family. And so everyone's trying to solve this problem and come up with a solution. So Mary goes to Jesus, her now grown son, her resourceful son, the oldest son in the family, to provide and to help in this situation. Maybe he's wise. Maybe he can come up with a solution and bear this weight and figure it out. And Jesus responds to her again in a strange way. He says, woman, or ma'am, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. What he's saying is, okay, what does your problem have to do with my problems? Almost seeming disrespectful. But this phrase, my hour has not yet come, alludes to a mission that he was on. A mission that his heavenly Father had sent him toward. He would use this phrase multiple times, my hour has not yet come, referring to his life, death, and resurrection. The hour of his crucifixion. He says in John 6, I have come down from heaven, not to do my will, but the will of him who has sent me, my Father. His mother wanted to commandeer her resourceful grown son for her own purposes, but Jesus, being redirected to honor his father, actually commandeered his mother's purposes for his own reasons. And at this wedding, gives his disciples a taste of his glory, which would be revealed to them when his hour would come. As for this day, his hour had not yet come. Jesus lived to honor his Father, and that completely compelled everything he did in his ministry. He perfectly fulfilled the task that his Father gave, as he says in John 17, hours before his crucifixion on the cross, to pay for the sin of his people, to forgive our sin and reconcile us to God. He says to God the Father, I have glorified, in another word for honored, you on earth by accomplishing all the works you gave me to do. Jesus was sent by God the Father to live a perfectly obedient life and die a sacrificial death on behalf of those who dishonored their parents and deserve judgment. He has come to forgive us our sin, to pay the penalty, and he lived a life which can be credited to our account through faith in him. This is the gospel. It's good news. The law says, do this and live. And we fail in many ways. Let us count the ways this spring as we go through the 10 Commandments to see all the ways we have not lived up to God's good design for life. Can you remember dishonoring your parents? Of course you can. And if you were to think about that more and more, how crushed would we be that we treated our parents the way we treated them sometimes? This is why Jesus came. Because in that state, you cannot stand before God and live. You cannot stand before God in that condition. In love, he sent Christ on a mission. In perfectly honoring his Father, he fulfilled that task. All the way to death on a cross. But you know what else is interesting? Is that on the cross, exhausted from the beatings and the whips and the nails holding him up, suffocating him because he doesn't have the ability to even raise his chest to breathe. He opens his eyes, perhaps for the last time. And who does he see? He sees his mother. You remember what he said to his mother? He saw Peter and he saw his mother and he said, behold your mother. He said, mother, behold your son. I'm gone. I'm passing away. I'm going. I need someone to care for my mother. That's amazing. Being divine, the divine Son of God. How much greater is this a display of honoring the mother than King Solomon bowing in his courtroom? What a display of love. Could this change our hearts? Could this grip us and reshape us? Could this completely flip around the ways we think we're honoring our parents? For however eternally important his mission was, he still did not neglect to honor his mother whose sins he was paying for on the cross. So how would the gospel change us and reshape us into people who honor our parents, respect governing authorities, and care for the elderly? One character quality comes to mind is humility. The gospel completely humbles us. Being given and offered a gift we did not deserve in Christ, to be reconciled to our God and Creator despite the ways we've rebelled against his commands and good design for life and mistreated our parents even. He's offered a way to be reconciled to him, to be forgiven, and also credited with perfect righteousness of Jesus, the kind of guy who would die and still honor his mother in his dying breath. If we receive this and become changed by the gospel and allow it to work into us so that we might humble ourselves before God and acknowledge that we're a sinful person who needs saving, perhaps we will now have the capacity to see many other gifts that we don't deserve, like the parents we had, and honor them with a humbled heart that has been softened by God's love for us in Jesus. Can't you start to see how this kind of humbled heart would work a new kind of character which walks in harmony with the duty of the fifth commandment and the purpose it is driving us towards. So consider obedience again, young children. Humble obedience. If we had humble obedience, not just obedience out of duty, but humble, reshaped obedience, it would lead us to respect other authorities in our life, whether at school, work, or in political authority. Humble listening. Humble listening would lead us to be curious. What other wisdom we might acquire in life through other elderly people that are around us. They are libraries of wisdom that are just sitting right next to us every day. Why don't we ask them more questions? Humble caring for our elderly parents would lead us to be tender-hearted toward other people who are in need, other elderly people in our lives. We may learn the joy of actually caring for those who have no one to care for them and dignifying those who would be left alone otherwise. And perhaps the most powerful way the gospel reshapes our life in how we honor our parents is by forgiving unhonorable parents. Not every parent is honorable. Some parents are bad people. Is there a way you could honor them? Here's a couple ways. By not holding it against them and leaving room for God to deal with that. How about not speaking poorly about them in public? Even deceased parents you can honor by speaking well of them, or at least withholding all the dishonorable things that you could share about them. The gospel completely reshapes our life. When we've received forgiveness from God, how easy now can we extend this to others in humility, understanding all that Jesus has done for us? When our hearts have been changed by the Father's love for us through Jesus, we can be changed into the types of people who honor even unhonorable parents and display to a watching world the love of Christ, the gospel. Let's consider for a few moments now how we might make a resolution with our own life. This is time for you to pray. Let's have a moment to consider. Just a quiet moment. There's no rush. There's no clock. What is something the sermon made you think about that you need to pray about? We can all be grateful probably in one hand and give praise to God, from whom all blessings flow, for the parents or parental kinds of people we had in our life. Perhaps there's ways we need to repent of breaking and rebelling against this commandment. Perhaps there's something God is calling you to specifically regarding reaching out to your parents, getting to know elderly people around you. How might God be calling you to respond in your own personal life today? Let's take a moment to pray.